Hello everyone, Professor Hornbeak here. So I will be teaching on the topic effective keynote presentations. So more than 300 million presentations are created every day, and over 6 million teachers use PowerPoint or Keynote. That's a lot, right? So using visuals to aid our instruction has transitioned from a luxury to an expected tool which we must complement in any lecture or lab or workshop or training. So thoughtful slides without fancy transitions and complicated backgrounds provide the best learning tools for users. Edward Tufte is a pioneer of data visualization. He suggests, quote, "The more data depicted, the better. However, in order to simplify, reduce the scale." So he refers to non-data visuals, visuals that are unnecessary, as chart junk. Here's an example of an infograph that includes quite a bit of information regarding calories and the types of foods and how many calories are in these types of foods. So as you're looking at this, I want you to pay attention to what is unnecessary in this infograph. What could be taken out? Are there things that are repetitive? Are there things that you just unneeded and crowd the information? So I'm going to kind of take these away. So the first one includes a little table on the right side. We're going to take that away. And then we're going to keep peeling back. You'll see that there's the calories per 100 grams there and a lot of color. And I'm stripping it away, only using grays and reds here. And then finally, you don't necessarily need that graph, the lines going through them, as well as the table on the left, if you can just show how many calories are in each food. So you can see how this is the exact information as we started with. However, it's so much easier to read and only includes the important information, which becomes more efficient and more useful for our eyes to look at. So we are living in a day and an age of just information overload. There's so much information out there. And part of my job and all of the professors here, our job is to filter that information, to give you the tools that you need. It's like we're going to Walmart, we could buy everything, but this is exactly what you need here. So we're experiencing this gluttony, and on top of that, we have so much information we can't visually see it. Good design is the best way to navigate information overload, making data more interesting and engaging to look at. Increasingly, visualizing information, seeing patterns and connections tells a story, while allowing those who are teaching that information or distributing that information to focus on the information that's the most important. Here's an example of a really fun infograph that I love, showing common birthdays. You can find your birthday in there. You'll notice that there are less common birthdays on holidays due to we have the technology and the medical knowledge to control some of the birthdays now, as well as some more common birthdays are in September and October, which is almost exactly 9 months from New Year's Day, which I thought was kind of a fun fact. So my birthday is April 8th, kind of in the average section there. Turning your 30-slide lecture like this, I'm sure you've seen in classes where you have just so much text to look at and so much text to read, and the worst is when that person is just reading off the slides, right? So turning your PowerPoints looking like this into something like this. So the exact same information, but you can visually organize what goes where. You can categorize it with color, with the size of the text hierarchy that I talk a lot about. So you can see that the text is larger, giving it the most important information, the thing that you need to read first, and then the more detailed information becomes smaller and smaller. So at the intersection of art and science, data journalist David McClandis, who I love and I reference in our references on your syllabus as well as resources on Discovery, turns complex data sets such as worldwide military spending, media buzz, and even peak breakup times, according to Facebook, into beautiful, simple diagrams which reveal unseen patterns and connections. And I'll have you watch, if you haven't already, watch his TED Talk on a lot of this, how his process of making these. Torner Tranders, a Danish physicist, converted the bandwidth of the senses into computer terms here with this infograph. Your sense of sight is the fastest. It has the same bandwidth as a computer network. Next, you have touch, which is about the speed of a USB key. Then you have hearing and smell, translating to the capability of a hard disk. Next, there's taste, barely the power of a pocket calculator. And then finally, that little white square there in the bottom right corner is 0.7%. This square represents the amount that we're actually aware of. The bulk of our senses is visual. Visual comprehension is so easy for our brains to retain. It's effortless. The eye is delightfully sensitive to patterns and variations of color, shape, and pattern, which is a quote from his TED Talk. Color, shape, and pattern are the eye's alphabet. If you combine the language of the eye with text, numbers, and concepts, essentially two languages are speaking to the brain simultaneously. Each language is complementing the other, starting with feeding the eye attractive color, pattern, and shape, following with hands-on activity, all while providing verbal instruction allows the entire brain of your audience to ultimately engage with the subject. So McClandis mentions, quote, by visualizing information, we turn it into a landscape that you can explore with your eyes, a sort of information map. When you're lost in information, an information map is so useful. In the same way a picture paints 1,000 words, data visualization and infographics allow the brain to easily digest complex data quickly and accurately. Hi, this is Heather Hornbeek. I'm just going to teach and kind of respond to Dr. John Bohannon's TED Talk on Dance Your PhD. So if you haven't watched it yet, go ahead and watch it. Dr. John Bohannon is a scientist and writer who runs the annual Dance Your PhD contest and has his PhD in molecular biology. And even with his educational background, even he has a difficult time understanding concepts from other biologists. So he developed this program called Dance Your PhD, where scientists can explain their research with dance. Bohannon proposes, quote, bad PowerPoint presentations are a serious threat to the global economy. Assuming each day collects one half-hour presentation for an average audience of 4 people with the salaries of $35,000, and it conservatively assumes that about a quarter of the presentations are a complete waste of time, and given that there are some apparently 300 million PowerPoint presentations created every day, that would end up adding up to an annual waste of $100 billion. So I just wanted to kind of respond to that and add some to what he's trying to explain. It's a large proposal that PowerPoints are costing America $100 billion, but I think he's on to something. He's on to the fact that we are not thinking visually, and we are just using PowerPoint very thoughtlessly. And what we really need to do is focus on how people engage with our content visually and even audibly. And so you can explain really abstract concepts or really heavy concepts in a more accurate and more engaging way so that multiple people can understand, your users can really understand what you're talking about, what you're trying to get, what your point and what your pitch is. So I want to talk a little bit about resonating with your audience. So these two guys, very, very different people, very successful people that you will automatically recognize. Steve Jobs and Martin Luther King actually have some of the world's greatest presentations. They both have this really interesting pattern where they talk about what is versus what could be. And you have to create this contrast when you're generating interest, both visually and audibly, with what is and what could be. Let's remember that there's one indisputable attribute to a great story. There must be some kind of conflict or imbalance perceived by the audience so that your presentation resolves that conflict. This sense of discord is what persuades them to care enough to take action. So in a presentation, you create imbalance by consciously juxtaposing what is with what could be. So if you're listening to, once you listen to Martin Luther King, which I have included, his I Have a Dream speech, which is so powerful even, several years later, he talks in this same pattern of what is and what could be. And you can see actually his transcript here. So at the very beginning, he starts his speech with scriptures and songs and political promises that are familiar to people. And at the end of the first what is, he says, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check that has come back marked insufficient funds. And he uses that metaphor because at the time, it's the most disappointing thing ever, if you can imagine, to receive a check, go to the bank, and it not go through. And then the people really started to scream at the first what could be by saying, quote, so we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us, upon demand, the riches of freedom and the security of justice, end quote. And he goes back and forth between what is and what could be, and eventually saying what we all probably remember of his speech, quote, I have a dream that one day, and then he goes on and on there. They both end their presentation having described the world as what is in this new bliss. I encourage you to listen to listen and watch his speech that I have included. So then there's Steve Jobs. His presentation with the iPhone launch was just so remarkable. So he starts off with kind of giving everyone that's going to this presentation has just been waiting so patiently to find out what Apple has created this time. And there's a lot of rumors. There's a reason why macrumors.com is such a big website, because it, especially at this time, there are all these rumors going on about the iPhone. And I personally was really involved with this moment when I worked at Griffin Technology. So when I worked there, we actually had a picture of the iPhone a year before it came out. So it came out in 2007, this is 2006. And we had a printout of it, and we're just so the iPhone is turned off. We can't see anything. And we're all just like huddled around this picture that we printed out, trying to figure out what it was. Like, what in the heck is this thing? And Griffin, they made Apple accessories, so it was really important for us to know, kind of get a head start on what kind of accessories to make for the latest Mac products. And so this day, we were just all, huddled around the computer just watching to see what was going to happen. And in fact, because our relationship with Steve Jobs and the company of Apple was so strong, we've been with them for a really long time. We were able to sell, make quite a few products for the iPhone, which really boosted our sales and boosted our relationship with Apple. And it was such a fun experience. And I wanted to share a quick story about my interaction with Steve Jobs. So, Mr. Griffin Technologies, a very small company. Mr. Griffin, who owned the business, literally like just down the hall. His office is down the hall. He wasn't in very much, but we all interacted with him and his family. And he was friends with Steve Jobs. And so when I worked there, I had the pleasure of doing multiple things. I love, having different types of jobs and my day being different all the time. That was really fun for me. And I'm in my 20s. I'm like barely knowing how to use Photoshop, making these packages and sales materials and all that. And so it was around Christmas time, right before Christmas, and I was tasked with creating a nice package of Nashville-y things, like things that were made in Nashville, as well as some products and maybe a t-shirt for all of our main retailers that sold our products. And one of those was obviously Apple and Steve Jobs, because he was the CEO at the time. And I found some cookies. There's this really famous, it's called Christie Cookies, famous shop that has been making cookies in Nashville for forever. And so I got a box of those, like a tin can of those for everyone, some t-shirts, etc. And so I needed to ship all this stuff to them, and I had some help, but our system that we used to ship, so it was extremely robust. It's, made to manage thousands of orders a day. So people, if you order off the website, it goes to the system in the warehouse. Someone goes and gets it, puts it in a box, puts a label on it, and goes out. And so this system I was never trained on, and no one taught me how to use it. So I was just kind of like just trying to figure it out. And I had a whole spreadsheet of all these people that the director wanted me to send stuff to. And so I type in everything in this system, including their email. So what I didn't know was that just like when you get something on any kind of e-commerce store, you will receive a notification that you'll receive an email saying that your stuff was shipped. So I entered in the information, and then I had to put in, it asked for like description of what was in these boxes. And so I just put in cookies in the description. And little did I know that 30-something very fancy people, executives at Best Buy, executives at Radio Shack, were all getting emails from me saying that their box of cookies had shipped. And one of those people was Steve Jobs. And so Steve Jobs emails us back, including Paul Griffin, who owned the company, and CC'd me and asked us about cookies. Like, I'm getting some cookies. What's going on? And of course I was so embarrassed when I found out that I just sent all these fancy people an email saying they were getting cookies on accident. And there were a couple of people there that weren't too happy about that, but kind of laughed it off and it was fine. So all that to say, I can accurately tell everyone that Steve Jobs emailed me in his lifetime. So kind of a funny story to go along with this video, but I have this video included. I want you to watch his presentation. It's very long. You don't have to watch all of it. It's actually an hour long. But I wanted to bring up that this keynote presentation is an hour long, and everybody's just like screaming and so happy and so engaged and oohing and awing during the entire thing, because his delivery is just so mysterious. And I want you to really focus on the visuals that he uses. He has this very large screen behind him, and you'll notice that the template he uses is actually still around since this is 2007. You can still find it on Keynote, Apple Keynote, with the like black gradient behind. But I want you to really look at the transitions. There's this one transition where it has the word breakthrough, and the word breakthrough actually breaks. And just these really simple, you wouldn't really think about it that hard if you weren't really focused on the visuals. I want you to kind of hone in on how it coordinates with what he's talking about. And I think it really enhances his presentation for sure. So you can find his speech here, the outline of his speech, similar to Martin Luther King's. If you watch Steve Jobs' Macworld 2007 iPhone launch, Steve Jobs has this uncanny ability to make audiences' engagement appear simple and natural. His presentations compel an audience's undivided attention for an hour and a half or more, something that very few presenters can do. Carmine Gallo said, quote, "Steve Jobs does not deliver a presentation, he offers an experience." Jobs sets up what is in perfect form by giving an update on the market and performance of several Apple products, including Intel, Transition, retail stores, iPods, iTunes, and Apple TV, and then establishes this what could be with, quote, "This is the day I've been looking forward to for 2.5 years. Every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything," end quote. And he proceeds to introduce the iPhone as 3 products in one. And he comes back down to what is a few times in his speech by comparing the iPhone features with current products on the market that amplify the magnitude of his breakthrough iPhone. So he shows all these products that are apparently just, a piece of crap, and they have all these buttons, and how much better the iPhone is. So I want to talk a little bit about this lady, Nancy Duarte. She has actually written a few things about presenting visual stories that transform audiences. In this book, she talks about 3 principles to get your audience to resonate with you. Presentations are meant to inform, inspire, and persuade audiences. So why then do so many audiences leave feeling like have their time wasted, like John Bohannon mentioned? All too often, presentations don't resonate with the audience and move them to transformative action. No matter where you are on the organizational ladder, the odds are high that you've delivered a high-stakes presentation to your peers, to your boss, to your customers, in a classroom or a general public. Or if you haven't, you will. Presentation software is one of the few tools that requires professionals to think visually on an almost daily basis. But unlike verbal skills, effective visual expression is not easy or natural or actively taught in schools or business training programs. So this lecture, as well as her information on all this, it kind of fills that void. So I want to talk about the word resonance. Resonance means when an object responds to an external stimulus that has the same frequency on its own. That's resonance. So thinking about really being relative to your audience and finding that frequency and paralleling with it. So Nancy Duarte talks about making your audience the hero of your presentation rather than attempting to be the hero yourself. Her first principle is make it about the audience, not you. Your audience is the hero of your presentation, not you. See yourself as the mentor, like Mr. Miyagi in The Karate Kid. So if you alter your stance from seeing yourself as the hero to accepting the role of a mentor, your viewpoint will change. You'll start to realize that your audience has to learn the information for themselves with your guidance. Clearly contrast who the audience is when they walk into the room with whom they could be when they leave. Crossing the threshold into a special world is what we're aiming for. What is versus what could be. So drawing attention to the gaps forces users and an audience to contend with the imbalance until the new balance is achieved. So you're creating action. One more secret is to use repeatable phrases. Phrases that will get stuck in your audience's mind. Using those repeatable phrases on a PowerPoint, things that you want your audience to remember. You want to repeat those phrases, include it where they can read it, and have a visual representation. So I showed this in my person portfolio, but I wanted to show you this here as well. This is an infographic that I created representing the number of ordering choices customers have when they enter a Starbucks. There are approximately 87,000 cups here. So instead of showing the numbers as a data set, this is a visual representation of the concept of choice that we have in America. If you haven't seen it, I have included it in Discovery. I love this documentary. There's just so much truth in how the world thinks right now and what we're kind of the look into the future with technology and socially how this technology is affecting us. And Werner Herzog, the film is made by Werner Herzog. In his documentary, it's called Lo and Behold. He interviews these researchers shown here who are attempting to unleash the power of reading the human brain's thoughts. They explain if a person watches a video of an elephant walking across the Sahara versus reading the sentence, an elephant walked across the Sahara, the brain receives the information almost exactly the same. Therefore, if we show, it just proves the fact that if we show images as well as discuss what the image is doing or what the concept behind the image is, our brains actually receive the information twice, resulting in better comprehension, better action, better knowledge of the subject. So here is, I mentioned earlier, Edward Tufte. He's considered a pioneer of data visualization. He designed this infographic on the history of rock and roll. And again, he suggests that the more data depicted, the better. However, in order to simplify, reduce the scale. So when you're trying to include specific information, it's great to include any kind of visual, especially diagrams like this one. They're much more effective than bullet points and really help the brain see a landscape of all of this information. And here's a little quick test. I'll just give you pause for a second if you can guess what this is. But visual information without revealing its meaning on the screen while you're talking about it will actually perk interest about what that visual represents. And careful attention to your presentation while communicating information through color and pattern and shape. So here's an infographic that I always show my students, and it's very often not guessed. So I'm impressed if you guess it. But this infographic actually represents global internet access. So you'll see that the dark blue represents where we have a lot of internet access, down to the black, dark reds and blacks where there's very little access. And then the gray represents that it hasn't been studied yet. This is a fun example of, while I was talking, you were looking at this infographic and you were probably engaged with it because you were trying to figure out what it was. It was kind of a game for you. So that's all I have about visual comprehension, visual information, effective presentations. It's a lot of information, but I want you to really think about how you present your information and your concept and your pitches when you're doing your assignment. So not only, putting pretty images in there and following the rubric, but really resonating with your audience and teaching them the topic in a very engaging way.